Welcome to Dialogue Special on the 19th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party. I'm Yang Rui. This landmark conference will bring the most powerful Chinese leaders to Beijing to discuss the agenda of the party in the next 5 years. And there will be major personnel changes in the highest public office of the Standing Committee of the Central Political Bureau. As the head of the biggest ruling party in the world, Mr. Xi Jinping will fully establish his paramount authority in ensuring a modest, healthy economic development, in reforming the world economic order, and in pursuing co-prosperity through the Belt and Road Initiative. China will catch up with major industrial nations very quickly while commemorating the 100th anniversary of the party in the next 4 years. To take a closer look at the priority issues of Mr. Xi Jinping and the new team, we have a panel discussion today with Jorge Hanna, Chile's ambassador to China, Dr. Su Ge, president of China Institute of International Studies, Kishu Mahbubani, dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore, Mr. Chung Yin-moon, special advisor for unification, diplomacy, and national security affairs for South Korean President Moon Jae-in, and Zhang Weiwei, dean of the China Institute at Fudan University. Let's give them a big welcome. Thank you so much. First question, a very general question. What do you think the 19th National Congress will bring about in terms of the big difference to the future of China and indeed for Chinese politics?
Well, I think China is right now at a very important turning point. There is much happening around in the world, and China has a tremendous opportunity to step in and take the position that needs to be taken given the vacuum that we find in some parts of the North Atlantic in terms of the leadership that we have traditionally seen. In that sense, it seems to me that the Party Congress has a tremendous opportunity to show the way forward and how China can come to occupy that space in today's world. In that sense, I think there are tremendous expectations, and the world will be looking at what is happening on that occasion.
China has been put to the forefront to the leadership of the world, but the next question is whether China is ready. Dr. Su Ge.
My expectation is that there will be more continuity than change. Because when you look at the general situation, the world, there are so many tremendous changes taking place. And China is moving from the side gradually to the center stage of the world politics, economics, social development, and as we put it, global governance. So I would expect that China is going to move up to the world stage with more vitality as a responsible country, and then she's as expected, she's going to make more contribution, and then there will be more changes inside China, and as I said just now, there will be more continuity, because as we can see that this is going to be a very important historic momentum.
Kishu?
Well, I think the 19th Party Congress will be important on 2 counts. One about who's going to provide the next leadership, and the other is what's the next round of ideas. You see, and it's very clear that the decisions made at this Party Congress will determine the shape and nature of China's leadership in the next decade or 2. So that's a very important thing that has to be done. But equally importantly, China has had an amazing 40 years of exceptional and spectacular economic growth, and has done amazingly well by any standards. But the question is not the past 40 years, but the next 40 years. What are you going to do in the next 40 years? Are you going to take the same formulas of the first 40 years and apply them to the next 40 years? At a time when Chinese society has changed significantly. So I think that this Party Congress really has got to think very hard and very long term about some of the big challenges that are coming. And I completely agree with the ambassador of Chile that with the disappearance of American global leadership from the world is then asking who's going to provide it. And if the world's #1 power is not going to provide it, will the world's #2 power provide it? And these are big questions for the Party Congress.
I think that 19th Party Congress will produce a very strong and visionary leadership. Therefore, there will be a reinvented and resuscitated Chinese leadership, Xi Jinping. But at the same time, I hope that the new Chinese leadership would be benign leadership of the world with a moral mandate, and who can show some kind of consistency and coherence in world stage. Maybe new leadership in China, strengthened leadership, can replace American leadership if America continues to show chaotic and erratic behavior. Therefore, we have a great hope on the newly reinforced leadership in China after 19th Party Congress.
Right, whether China will be on the right side of history. At least in 4 years' time, we're going to usher in the centennial anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party of China in 4 years' time. Mission and mandate in the hands of Mr. Xi Jinping. We're going to watch out. We're going to see what's going to happen. Professor Yang Rui.
Yes, I pick up your point. Actually, if you look at the China's situation today, indeed, we have quite certain we are going to fulfill the first objective. That's the objective by the year 2021, moderately prosperous society. Now it's the preparation for the next stage by the year 2049 to be a full-fledged socialist developed country. So the 19th Party Congress will be a milestone in terms of that preparation, in terms of ideas, in terms of the organizational lineup for the next generation of leaders.
Thank you very much. Now, let's give a warm welcome to our special guest speaker, Dominique de Villepin, former Prime Minister of France.
Dominique de Villepin is a French diplomat and politician. He served as Prime Minister of France from 2005 to 2007. Prior to that, de Villepin had been appointed Foreign Minister by French President Jacques Chirac at the beginning of his second term in 2002. During this time, de Villepin made international headlines with a speech at the UN in which he voiced his country's opposition to the war in Iraq in 2003. His international reputation was made overnight. De Villepin has extensive influence in the international political arena. He is a formidable speaker with a sharp intellect and wit, and is in great demand at prestigious events worldwide.
The whole world has been impressed by a new idea that President Xi Jinping put forward 5 years ago when he took office. That's the Chinese Dream and China Road. So what does China Road actually mean for you, Mr. de Villepin?
Well, great expectations, because China has a very strong voice in the world today. One of the big changes that we have faced in the last years was a strong commitment of China in multilateralism. Strong commitment of China in free trade. We heard President Xi Jinping in Davos at the beginning of the year. And a very strong commitment of China in facing climate change. This has been very important facts for the rest of the world. At the same moment, we are facing uncertainties and more risk in the international scene. Election of Donald Trump, the Brexit, situation in North Korea, situation with Iran, and more crisis in the Middle East as well as in Africa, terrorism and problems of proliferation. So we need, as it has been very well said, more leadership, more initiative, and more stability. And I believe the view of China today, because it is related to strong values, traditional values as well as a strong ambition, can give the world this stability. We need to have more dialogue.
Yes, indeed, President Xi Jinping said in his policy speech in Davos, the winter Davos, that we live in great times, we also live in bad times. Mr. Ambassador.
Yes, China has been saying in the past 2 years is that China is looking at a different model. They're looking at cooperation, not building of military alliances, but rather working together. Win-win is the classic phrase in that regard. And working together with neighboring countries in Asia, but also working together with countries in Africa, in Latin America, and elsewhere. And I find that very interesting and very appealing, because it takes us away from this polarity between conflict on the one hand and alliances. rather a different model. And that I find very interesting. If you combine that with one belt, one road, which is a concrete material expression, these are not just pretty words. There are resources and institutions behind that. I find that very potent.
And actually, in the academic world, the China Road is often described as the China model. Yeah. Or how China...
Is it a model? Because there has been a lot of controversy surrounding the idea of a model.
Yeah. Actually, it's about how China, or the Chinese approach to development, to modernization, to foreign policy. So that can be understood as the China model. And I often say, if you look at China model politically, it's about selection plus election, rather than simply election. The 19th Party Congress will witness this. Economically, it's about the mixed economy, in which the state plays quite a prominent role. Of course, the market also plays a very important role. At the social level, it's about the dynamic interactions between the state and the society, rather than state versus society, or the other way around. So, in the foreign policy, just now the ambassador mentioned this idea of we advocate and promote win-win approach, partnership rather than military alliance. I think this will really, hopefully, reshape the new globalization.
But I see some paradox in the Chinese international stance. As the Prime Minister pointed out, yes, President Xi Jinping strongly advocates global, liberal, international economic order. And also China has shown that one, particularly with regard to climate change. But if you look at the Chinese security behavior toward the neighboring countries, continued conflict with India, okay, greater tension between China and South Korea over the issue of THAAD, and limited, leadership in resolving North Korean nuclear issue. You have still continuing tension with Japan. Definitely, China could have showed more leadership in security domain too. Therefore, there is some kind of mismatch between economic leadership and security leadership. Now, I want to hear some answers from Chinese colleague here. Maybe Dean Su-Ke can explain about that kind of mismatch.
We can look at it from at least two perspectives, domestic and international. President Xi Jinping's views are very balanced. He said that we have made tremendous progress. However, we still have a long way to go. There will be hurdles. And then he said that we need to be prepared not to fall into two traps. Domestically, we need to guard against the trap of middle income. And internationally, we are rising power. We need to guard against not to fall into the trap known as the Thucydides trap. We're not going to run into conflict with the status quo power. And internationally, Xi Jinping proposes a Chinese policy known as a policy for peace, development, cooperation, and win-win. In this way, he was trying to politically, we are going to set up, have more partnerships instead of falling into alliances to avoid the type of political alignments during the Cold War. And no longer the world economically, it's no longer a zero-sum game. And we need to joint efforts to make the economic pie much larger. We need to bring about contact between and among so many civilizations, because all countries considered, each country and every country has its own national conditions. Just now, Professor Jiang mentioned the Chinese model. Yes, there is a Chinese model. It has been proven to have been working for China. We hope that it will be working for some of the developing countries.
Well, I actually, to build on your point,
Yeah.
It's going to be a much more complex and difficult world. See, in some ways, as I say, over the past 40 years, you knew the shape of the global system. The United States was in charge, and everyone knew what the rules of the road were. But now, in the next 40 years, the United States will no longer be in charge.
Because President Trump says that he wants to put America first.
I think it's partly President Trump. But remember, it's the American people who voted for President Trump. And the American people send a very clear message to the world. Hey, we've been taking care of you guys for the past 40 years. Enough. Enough is enough. We want to come home. That's the message, not just from President Trump, but from the American people too. So if you enter a world where there's no longer clear global leadership, no longer certainty what the rules of the road are, it's a very different world. And so, you know, some of the things that, you know, China has actually made a huge contribution to the world by succeeding in its development, lifting up the living standards of 1.4 billion people. That's a massive contribution. But now, the world expects China to do more for the world also. So the expectations of China from the rest of the world are growing. And that's something I notice that sometimes the Chinese leaders don't pay enough attention to. For example, I mean, I would say the Belt and Road Initiative is a brilliant initiative. Frankly, Asia needs trillions of dollars of infrastructure, and the world, frankly, Asians are very happy with the BRI. You want to create an initiative that is not just owned by China, but owned by everybody, by South Korea, by Japan, by ASEAN, by India, and then you get a
Latin
different...
America.
Well, now my question for Mr. De Villepin is, how come that under the consistent Chinese communist leadership, China quickly becomes the second biggest economy? I mean, according to the theory of Western politics, only when liberal democracy and liberal market economy could come together and join a hand, we would not be able to prevail in both politics and economics. However, what happened in China seems to have changed the perceptions of almost all the overseas observers about what should be success.
Well, history tells us that experts are almost all the time wrong. So that's another example.
You are all experts here.
So you should not listen too much to experts. You should listen to experience. And China has many qualities and capacities to be at the forefront of nations. 1,400 million people, great technology, and a willingness to play a role and to defend values on the international scene. All this gives today a natural leadership to China. And at the same moment, we can see that the US doesn't want any more of this leadership. There is nationalism, isolation, unilateralism, which is playing a strong role. And the choice that China is making with its own very original system is very different. The truth is, and I completely agree with what just has been said, we need to invent a new international system, because the system today lacks governance, lacks capacity of being efficient. We see all the crises of the world, situation in North Korea, how to deal with that kind of difficult situation in Iran. And I think there are two ways. One is to try to understand what is going on, to try to have dialogue prevailing. And the other one is asserting, insulting, and not giving a chance for peaceful solutions.
We are talking about a new world order, economic and political alike. Now let's look at the key issue of governance. Everybody is talking about the keyword, catchphrase of governance and how to exercise better governance, either when China comes so close to the center stage of world economy or politics, or when we look at the Bretton Woods, the old economic system since the 1940s. What do you think should be the most important thing that characterizes the Chinese governance that will ensure somehow a bright future for our country at least?
Well, I think there are two key words. One is leadership. The other one is cooperation and respect.
Leadership is a common phrase, but what is unique about the Chinese leadership?
No, leadership is not a common phrase. Leadership means ability to take decision and to create good conditions for decision. That means initiative. The initiative in the Middle East, how to solve the Syrian crisis, initiative in Libya, initiative on North Korea, on Iran. Try to create a situation where different countries, different positions might go on one good track. That needs imagination. You need great diplomacy. You need talents. You need think tanks. That's a huge work to be done. It's not just one person deciding for all the others. It's creating the conditions for imagination and decision.
In Singapore, unique family politics. Following Lee Kuan Yew, you have Lee Hsien Loong. This is a kind of Asian democracy, right?
And you know what's the secret formula? 3 pillars. One is meritocracy, and here I agree with Prime Minister Dominic Villepin, it's about leadership, picking the best people to be in leadership. That's meritocracy. You don't pick your uncle, your cousin, your nephew to be the finance minister. Please don't do that. Pick the best person to be the finance minister. Second, pragmatism. And frankly, the best definition of pragmatism was given by Deng Xiaoping when he said, it doesn't matter whether a cat is white or a cat is black. If it catches mice, it is a good cat. So pragmatism means learning from others, and that's what you need for good governance. But the last one is the hardest, and that is honesty. MPH. Honesty means you must have zero corruption. And that's where I think President Xi Jinping is being really brave in China today, because his anti-corruption campaign is absolutely critical.
And in fact, in the early days of China's opening up, we learned a lot from Singapore to how to maintain a clean image
and
about the government.
And I think that also, this MPH also explains China's success. You pick the best leaders, you've been pragmatic, you learn from the others, and you push for honesty.
Let me go to the audience here for your questions. So you may ask questions or make comments. Now let me go to the brilliant representatives of the university students and some of the scholars here in the capital city of Beijing. Who would ever raise hand and ask your question and make comments? Please.
I have a question about, along with leadership, comes with the responsibility. And I wonder, and also challenges, of course. And for China to assume a leadership, we're not sure yet. China does not have the experience. I'm not sure whether China has the ability to deal with those challenges around the world. So what's the prospect for a rising China assuming the leadership? I have the questions probably for Chinese scholars, Professor Zhang and Professor Su Ge.
Well, our friend from South Korea would like to take the initiative, or Professor Zhang Weiwei. Yes, Chung Ye-moon.
No, I think.
Why don't you go ahead?
I think China is a quick learner. Whether you really exercise leadership or not, sometimes not decided by you yourself. For instance, China is now the largest trading partner for 128 countries. They expect you to play some leading role, whether you are ready or not. So the China model is that let's start and learn on the job, and gradually we improve. But let's do it what's gradual, experimental, cumulative, eventually some kind of leadership role will take place.
You ask the quality of leadership that can be exercised by China. One of my favorite philosophers is Chinese legalist philosopher Sun Tzu. He talked about 3 types of leadership. Leadership by human virtue or moral leadership. Leadership by hegemonic power, 霸道 or 霸权. And then leadership by coercive, naked power. China have shown both hegemonic power and naked power. But China has been short of showing moral leadership, the leadership by human virtue, so that you can really exercise your soft power. Let all the other countries respect China. Therefore, really, after the 19th Party Congress in China, I really hope new leader Xi Jinping would show to the world, I can lead with moral virtue, human virtue.
Do you have any questions for Mr. de Villepin, who is now leaving early?
What is going to be the drive for foreign policy? What is coming out of this Party Congress, and how China will act in the next few years?
Okay, China and India, the elephant and dragon, have just emerged unscathed from a Doklam border conflict, and he's shown more interest in diplomacy following the 19th National Congress of the CPC.
One of the very important factors we're going to see growing in the next year is the strong commitment of China toward the rest of the world. If you look at the UN, China's voice is stronger and stronger. China today is the first country in terms of contribution to peacekeeping forces around the world. This is something completely new. On climate change, the 2 big voices on the international scene is China and Europe. So this also is a big change. This is going to completely change the way the world governance is working, because China has been for very long a little bit discreet, a little bit shy in regard with the international scene. I do believe that today China wants fully to play its own role, take responsibility. And what's very strange is that at this very moment, we see the US stepping back. Obama began with the idea of leading from behind, but when you lead, you cannot be behind. You have to show the way. So many risks, so many uncertainties, so many difficulties. You need to take the risk of decision. And I do believe today, Chairman Xi is in the position of taking these risks. Hopefully, Europe will be able to play its own role as a pole of stability and a pole of movement. We need to have more capacities around the world, more voices in order to join countries like China and be able to take decisions and take steps in order to solve crises.
Let's start the second chapter of our discussion here about China's diplomacy. We've been discussing some aspects concerning China's vision as a major power, rising power, whether we're going to take over as the helmsman of world politics. The issue about China's diplomacy actually focuses on whether we have made any major difference to what has happened since the 18th National Congress of the Communist Party Central Committee. We start from Professor Zhang.
I think a major difference is at the strategic level. For many years in the past, what I saw, was a lot of strategic ambiguity. Since Xi Jinping came to power, he put this in a different perspective, strategic clarity, which is good actually for China, for other countries. And in a way, we see the fruits of this foreign policy.
Excuse me, are you saying we are saying goodbye to the era of Tao Guang Yang Hui? We won't uphold the principle of keeping a low profile in international politics. That certainly goes against the legacy of the Deng Xiaoping theory about China's diplomacy in world
Actually,
arena.
if you read Deng Xiaoping's original message, it's very clear. Keeping a low profile is in order to allow China eventually to play a greater role on the international stage. And China is now playing this role. Of course, sometimes we are still learning, but the international community, as just now mentioned by so many people here, expect China to play such a role. The world is full of uncertainties, whether it's Brexit, Donald Trump, and other problems. China, crucially, provides certain predictability.
An expert of Chinese studies for both Professor Tung Yinmu and Professor Kishima Babani, what do you think of, say, Tao Guang Yang Hui? In English, we will still keep a low profile. Mr. De Villepin also repeat the same concern. China has been shy from the center stage of world politics and economics. Will that be the case any longer after the 19th National Congress?
The perception of China in the world has changed. And I think it's very important for the Chinese people to understand that as China becomes bigger and bigger,
size doesn't matter.
You know, what happens is that the rest of the world gets a bit concerned. How do we deal with this China? It's one thing to deal with a China with an economy this big. It's another thing to deal with China with an economy this big. So it's important for the Chinese people to understand that the level of concern about China in the rest of the world is growing. And certainly, China is perceived, I can tell you, I don't agree with the Americans who say that China is becoming aggressive. China is not aggressive at all, but China is becoming more assertive. And that's natural.
But I'm afraid the word assertive sounds pretty negative in world politics.
No. Actually, assertive is a perfectly normal behavior for great powers throughout history. But the key point I want to make is this, and I want to build on the point that Prime Minister Dominic de Villepin made earlier in response to the question. He said on climate change, is China and Europe working together? Two key pillars. Now, that's what China needs to do. Find a few other key partners to work together with. Singapore actually is very keen to support China on the Belt and Road Initiative, and that's why Minister Shanmugam gave a speech at the Lee Kuan Yew School where he pointed out that 85% of inward investment on BRI into China comes through Singapore, and 33% of outward investment on BRI also goes through Singapore. So this makes Singapore a very key stakeholder in the BRI initiative, and we will support it 100%.
Yeah, well, you mentioned keeping the low profile, Yang Rui. If China talk about Yang Rui, that's a hypocrisy. Nobody believes it. Then you tell the truth. China no longer pursues Yang Rui. China has risen. Okay? And then you show that kind of behavior, benign behavior, predictable behavior, stabilizing behavior. That is the way you should go. Why should you hide? 有所作为. Time has come.
有所作为, yeah. You should do something. You're a man of action, right?
Yeah, China has shown kinds of what? China still seems to be in the zone of twilight zone. Okay? On the one hand, the peaceful development, 和平发展, and then you're rising. But you cannot make a harmonization between the two. But it's time for you to tell the truth to the world. We have reason, we have responsibility. We'll show that responsibility, not only through the One Belt, One Road, but through the climate change and even international trade order, monetary order, even regional stability in this part of the world.
Yes, in fact, our friend from South Korea tried very hard to figure out what's the difference between peaceful rise and peaceful development. When this idea was first put forward by Professor Zheng Bijian from the Central Party School about 和平崛起, a lot in the Foreign Ministry of China said, no, we should keep a low profile. We should emphasize on the different implication of 和平发展, peaceful development. Now, what are the differences between the two catchphrases? Professor Zhu Ge.
Well, I would like to quote something from President Xi Jinping. Recently, he quoted something from Napoleon. He said Napoleon compared China to a lion. And he said, lion. Yeah. He said, when this lion awakes,
watch out.
This is going to shake the whole world. And President Xi Jinping said, now, this China lion now awakens. But he's going to be a peace-loving lion, and adorable, and ready to make friends and cooperate with other people. So that means that that's the kind of image of China. And the people, as my friend says, that other people would have more expectation. You are right, and we expect to be more. But I would like to make this following comments. That is lots of expectation from China. But I think that China, together with other members of the international community, we can make more contribution to the world governance. We can play certain leading roles. But I don't think China is going to fill up the vacuum left by the old status quo power, and we are going to be the leader of the world. I don't think so. What we propose, like the Belt and Road Initiative, we are trying to bring more changes, more reforms to the existing system for the international system of peace and development, like the United Nations and so on. And I don't think China is going to alter the whole thing, but we are ready, together with the international community, to bring about, to have some positive input into the structure.
Here is the focus of our debate, conflicting views about the image of China. The great changes that have taken place in China present a different image. Three images, in fact. Are we a giant panda, a dragon, or what you call the lion by Napoleon Bonaparte a few centuries ago? Which image is closer to the truth, Mr. de Villepin?
Well, you can be the three. So there is no reason in choosing.
Then we are more confused.
But I think Napoleon was right in comparing the country with a lion, because the lion keeps always very quiet until the moment the lion is ready, or the moment the lion believes he needs to open an eye. This is very clever, because we are in a moment in the international scene where China has to move for two reasons. The first one is the strength of China is now so big that it has to move forward. But the second reason is that we need China to take responsibility. We don't want a war with North Korea. We don't want a war with Iran. We don't want Saudi Arabia to go on war with Iran. And if we don't do something, the worst is going to happen. So today we need solidarity in the international scene, and we need action. And we need to have responsible actors The problem is we have more and more irresponsible actors that are a risk for the international community. And we have the American leadership which is fading at the same time. So we have the European that are exactly in the same position than China. They have to take more responsibility. People now are looking towards Angela Merkel after the elections, Emmanuel Macron, all the leaders in Europe, because we expect them to do more for the international community. Exactly the same for China. We need more predictability, we need more decision, we need more sustainability. This is a common responsibility.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Thanks a lot.
On the Belt and Road Initiative, for too long, in terms of international development, and this is for Latin America is particularly important, we have had a sort of accountant perspective on international development. The main thing is to balance your accounts. If you do that, you will be fine and progress will come. Well, it doesn't work that way. What China is saying, what you need is connectivity. What you need is infrastructure. You build roads, you build bridges, you build digital infrastructure. And if you do that, things will happen. You will have more commerce. You will have more investment. And that is why we in Latin America say Belt and Road is not limited to Eurasia. We would like to reach across to the Americas through trans-Pacific cables, through working on our logistics and our ports and our transport to facilitate trade with Asia. By 2050, half of the world's product will be in Asia. For us, therefore, this is extremely important. So I think that is a new idea that has been put on the table, and we must grasp it with both hands.
But we always keep in mind the idea of a Monroe Doctrine. So we are afraid of making an intrusion into the so-called backyard of the United States.
The Monroe Doctrine no longer exists, so you don't have to worry about that.
I have one quick suggestion. The United States had a policy of weakening the United Nations, of keeping multilateral institutions weak, and preferring bilateral approaches to multilateral approaches. China can do the exact opposite. China can work to make the United Nations strong. China can work to make the multilateral institutions strong. If China makes this one big switch, the world will become a much happier place, and everyone will say, hey, this is what the world has been crying out for, more multilateralism, and China is now providing it. So if you provide the global public good...
I'm afraid that Kishu, the United States would not agree with you, because they disagree with the idea of a new type of a major power relationship, which was put forward by President Xi Jinping 5 years ago. They said, how come that the socialist country and the Chinese communist leadership would catch up and replace the United States as the sole superpower with the demise of the former Soviet Union? They disagree with you.
But it's very different.
Does China get a permission from the U.S. in doing something?
That's the question we're asking.
China should do what he wants to do. China can be multilateral without United States approval.
But President Xi Jinping says we have 1,000 reasons to improve the good relationship between the United States and China. We don't have a single reason to destroy this most important bilateral relationship.
Let me give you some examples. Okay, sanctions on North Korea. China has been complying with United Nations Security Council resolution all the way. But China strongly opposed individual unilateral sanctions on North Korea. There is a source of conflict between China and the U.S. But China has been keeping up with UN resolutions. That is a good example. But problem is China's lack of commitment and lack of courage to implement its commitment. For example, President Xi Jinping's new Asian security idea, common cooperative, comprehensive, sustainable security. President Xi Jinping made the statement in Shanghai in 2014, but there was no implementation at all.
Actually, in international politics, economics, and global governance, China proposes for what I call jointly brainstorming, jointly exercise, and put all these plans into action. And in the end, we can jointly, we can have shared benefits. Minister Wang Yi says that, the decision made by the United Nations Security Council to push for harder sanctions on North Korea following the most recent 6th round of nuclear the test. That was the denuclearization for the peninsula period. That was the unanimous decision by the international community. Then we need to have sanctions. However, sanction is only one part of the United Nations decision. Actually, to solve this decade-old quandary, you need to have several keys. China also proposes for a suspension for suspension. Eventually, we hope that the United States and North Korea would enter into a dialogue or negotiation so that 1953 armistice will be finally replaced by a new peace treaty.
Up next is the time for Q&A. Any questions and comments from audience here?
China has always been present a very ambiguity in its attitude, whether we would like to a little bit interfere into other countries' tracks or not. So, but I think that because Chinese have kept the whole habit or the rule to be to keep a very low profile. So we don't know that whether it is good for the China to take more clear attitude towards that kind of security problem. Yeah, thank you.
A very good question. I think that in China's foreign policy, there is a key word that is cooperation. And cooperation, normally, people talk about it in economic affairs and in people-to-people contact. I think that when you look at the Chinese foreign policy, there is an important element in the security area as well. Because China, Xi Jinping was saying that even in the hardcore politics, international security relations, we can still have more dialogues and more interaction. That is, he proposes actually what is now known as the cooperative security. Now, if two countries are there, both have military hardware targeting at each other. Now think about a situation in which one side to the other, hey, I do not regard you as my enemy. In this way, the security situation will be significantly altered. In the international arena, we propose what we call democratization of international relations. We need to have more input. We need to listen to other people's suggestions. We need to, not only we put forward our suggestions, but we hear other people's suggestions. Together, we can make progress. That's what China is going to do. Thank you.
There are two things I would say that we have to keep in mind. First of all, in the past 4 years, that has become evident, and China is taking a more forward-looking, more assertive position. The second point is that after what has happened in Europe, what has happened in North America in the past 2 years, there is a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum, and therefore that position has to be taken up. In China, some would say against what it thought would happen. China was seen as a country that was waiting. Perhaps in 10, 20 years, it would take the sort of initiative that we're seeing now. But there is no other country that can take these sort of initiatives. And that is why it seems to me that China, in some ways, has been forced to take a more forward role in international affairs.
Any more questions? Go ahead.
So my question will be to Kishore Madhubani, Professor, and others, President Xi Jinping is executing the 3 principles of good governance, MPH, to make the domestic reforms in the military and in the PLA. Xi Jinping is so courageously as a Napoleon tiger, executing the reforms and working on the corruption and nepotism in the domestic reform. So what will be his stand, and what can we expect from the 19th-party Congress in the international security reforms, and will Xi Jinping courageously and as a Napoleon lion will agree for the UN Security Council reforms and will allow the other raising powers in the region and in the globe to enter into the UN Security Council?
President Xi Jinping has been exceptionally brave. I mean, domestically, his anti-corruption campaign, the way he's shaking up the leadership, is quite amazing. And your question is, will he be exceptionally brave also on the global scene? And I think he will be, but you picked the most difficult issue, which is, will he allow India to join the UN Security Council? But the world has changed so much. And you can't take formulas that were worked out. I mean, why are there 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council? Because they won World War II in 1945.
The last chapter of our discussion here today is about the Chinese economy, of course. President Xi Jinping is clearly aware of the importance of livelihoods of the ordinary folks in China. The high-speed railway, online payment, e-shopping, as well as mobile are said to be the 4 new innovations by the Chinese in the new era. Having said this, what do you make of the phrase of a new normal that guaranteed, surprisingly, 6.7% of the GDP growth rate, according to the latest statistics from the Chinese authorities? Do you think this is a kind of bubbles in our growth? What do you make of the new normal?
No, actually, the new normal has to do with the international environment. After the financial crisis 2008, the West, United States, Europe were more or less in recession, which caused reduced demand for goods, etc. And then de-globalization, all the phenomenon came out. So the Chinese approach is interesting because China is one of the very few countries that can really carry out substantial reforms, economic restructuring. The 4 innovations you mentioned are actually 4 revolutions, bullet train revolution, WeChat revolution, online payment revolution, e-commerce revolution. All these are the new economy. China said, no, innovation, breaking new paths for the Chinese economy and for the global economy. We're doing that.
Germany relies on the Chinese market very much for the sale of its automobiles. However, today, Germans have developed a strong sense of crisis and urgency. They say the use of electricity as the engine for new mobiles, for new automobiles, will endanger the future of Germany. They say China is fast entering into the era of artificial intelligence, and the use of electricity instead of other traditional fossil fuel will make a breakthrough in the revolution of energy revolution. What do you think of, say, the new economic reconfiguration?
The traditional view, at least from our part of the world, was that the Chinese were very good at copying, but not very good at innovating and coming up with new products. Well, that is no longer the case. We have new products. I am told that in Shenzhen there is more innovation in mobile technology than, say, in Silicon Valley in California, where I studied. But the other thing that I find very important here is innovation in business processes, which is what you talked earlier about. E-commerce, WeChat, and so on and so forth. So it's not just innovation in products, it's innovation in business processes. And there, for example, in our part of the world, we are getting millions and millions of packages from AliExpress. The Chilean post office is overwhelmed. They don't know what to do. They used to be, a sleepy organization with no letters being written, mailmen had nothing to do. Now, they're getting millions of packages from China, and they're overwhelmed. So what I'm saying is that we have a very new situation, not just in products, also in processes.
At the very beginning of our discussion here, Professor Su Ge said we face 2 major traps. Internally, we have the middle income trap. Externally, inevitable clashes between the rising power and the existing power. Let's look at the middle income trap. South Korea has set a very good example of, passing this phase of the middle income trap. Do you think China will walk another different road?
Yeah, now South Korea's per capita income is about $25,000 to $27,000. We wanted to go beyond $30,000, but we were not able to do that since 2008. Therefore, now in South Korea, we call it as a middle-income country trap. But in the case of China, China wanted to exceed more than $10,000 per capita income and reaching into $20,000, okay, hopefully by 2021, creating Shaokang society. But it would not be easy for China really, manage sustainable economic, development. Okay, and it is not easy for China to reduce income and wealth gap in Chinese society. It is not easy to deal with your pollution problems. It is not easy for you to secure all the scarce resources for the satisfaction of domestic consumption. Therefore, what I'm saying is this: apart from just simple indicators such as the middle income, China has lots of structural problems to worry about.
One major obstacle to China's fast development economically is how to reform the SOE, the state-owned enterprises. Many Western observers are still pretty skeptical as to whether the state-owned enterprises, a major part of the Chinese economy, will help China's rapid development. Professor Yang Rui, you have done a lot of studies.
Chinese SOEs have undergone already many reforms, and they play a crucial role. When I look at the e-commerce in China, last year, the Double 11 Festival, e-commerce festival, one-day trade volume in China, in Alibaba, was more than the whole year annual trade volume e-commerce of India. That's the scale of China. Actually, I don't buy this middle income trap. I think this is, to be honest, World Bank rubbish. No. It's not standard test.
I agree.
Really.
I agree.
Yeah. In Africa, you have a country over 20,000 US dollars, which even don't have running water. Yeah. So I have to, say, in the case of China, you have two blocks or two parts. One part, the developed part, about 300 million people, and the other is the emerging part. And the two parts are engaged in extremely dynamic, mutually reinforcing interactions. And that creates China's miracle.
What makes a difference about the reform of the SOE is the idea of a PPP, the combination of a public-private partnership. Do you think that will make a big difference?
Actually, if you look at the performance of China's SOEs, some of them are extremely well done. And actually, I remember in the 1980s, when China was debating the same issue at that time, and the Chinese leader, one of the leaders said, look at Singapore Airlines. It's a state-owned company. It's doing very well. In other words, you put state-owned companies into competition, into the world of competition. They perform very well. And on the other hand, look at private companies. The financial crisis, these Wall Street companies, they are all private-owned, but they are extremely bad performance.
I think that's a very good comment. Yeah. Just now, the China's economy and people are saying that it's a little slower than before. But look, you need to look at the essence, look at the contents. Now we have more innovation. Now we have more reform on the supply side. This economy, my point is, it has vitality. So we don't need to worry too much about it. China's economy is still in good shape.
And still there is much space for urbanization and the development of the service industry, which accounts for over 70% even the developing country of India.
Yeah.
Now, my last question, which is meant to have a very quick answer from each and every of you. If you were invited to give an advice to President Xi Jinping about the leadership and the mandate of the Chinese Communist Party, very quickly, can each of you present your suggestion to His Excellency President Xi Jinping about the future mandate, leadership, and the governance? Your suggestion.
Keep your hand on the steady ship, steady as it goes.
Now, keep on the leadership, and then you have the whole Chinese people following.
I made my suggestion already. Reform global multilateral institutions and make them stronger. That will create a better world, especially for China.
China dream is beautiful. You got to realize it.
And I think Xi Jinping has been doing a very good job, and keep on this good job.
Thank you so much. Your insightful comments and your participation have brought this brainstorming to a very successful conclusion in partnership with Yang Rui Institution. I thank you so much.